So yeah, as I mentioned, it's being recorded. From that perspective, we won't be doing breakout rooms as there is just a few of us today. We'll just do it in the main room all together, and Beth will share for you the link to the Google Jamboard, and then if you can just try it whilst I'm doing introductions and let us know if you've got any issues sort of accessing that so we can address those. Before we dive in, I'll give you a little introduction to myself, and then I'll hand over to Beth and she can introduce herself. So I have been working on the provider development team for about 18 months now at NCFE, and we support you in your delivery from curriculum planning to looking at formative assessment to unpicking the specifics of the qualification from a subject matter perspective. Previous to joining NCFE, I was a primary school teacher and I specialised in PE and PSHE and all the healthy schools initiatives and aspects. And outside of that, qualified as a personal trainer as an area of interest to myself. So got that subject sort of expertise of the qualification to help. And I'll hand over to Beth and she can give you a little introduction to herself and her role.
Thanks, Sarah. So hi everyone, I'm Beth and I've been working at NCFE for just over a year and I support with the Cert qualifications. So I support centres like yourself. But previous to working at NCFE, I was teaching at an FE college for nearly 20 years and my background was art and design.
Thanks, Beth.
So in this webinar, we're going to provide an overview of the Cert Technical Award in Sports Studies, covering the qualification, the structure and the assessment, and we'll explore curriculum planning and formative assessment, where you'll have the opportunity to look at your pupils' knowledge journey and create a roadmap that's going to help you have a better understanding of how and when to teach the indicative content, as well as to develop some formative assessment activities. And we'll share a summary of all the resources and support that will be available from NCFE to support you and your pupils before giving you the opportunity to create some teaching and learning activities of your own that can help deliver the content in an active and engaging way. And as a group, you'll also learn from one another and share best practice on what you currently use in the classroom. And this will be through the activities, through the chat. And lastly, there'll be opportunity to ask questions that you may have about the qualification. And then this is just to make you aware, for those of you who are already delivering the qualification, we are aware that our quality assurance team have recently postponed sessions which cover how the Model 5 Certs are assessed. The rearranged dates for these have not been shared with us yet, but please be aware that they are not part of this training, so you're unable to answer any specification questions about assessment regulations, and the rearranged dates will be before the end of this academic year, and before you need the information before you do your assessment in year 2. So unfortunately today we can't, if there's any questions around the NEA, we can't answer that until that has gone ahead, and it will go ahead by the end of this academic year. And that's for those of you who are already delivering.
Thanks for that, Beth. So just to start, and the idea that coming to it brand new to teaching or coming to it first year teaching, where is your current confidence score? So Beth's going to launch the poll on the screen for you. 1 being no to little confidence and 10 being very confident. How confident are you with the delivery and assessment for this Cert qualification? We'll just have a look about where we are to begin with. Show me. Okay, so I can see there that we've got a split. So we've got we're 50-50. Some at the lower end, that 1 to 2, don't worry, particularly if you are brand new to teaching as well, or even if you're just brand new to this qualification specification. I've been there on lots of qualifications myself. And then we've got that 7 to 8. So potentially it's knowing the content there, but not understanding sort of the structure of the qualification and the assessment. But we will be covering all of that in today's session. And as I've said, if you've got any questions as we approach any slides, then please ask away. If you are just collecting questions, we will do question and answer at the end as well, where we'll stop the recording for the last few minutes and you can just stop and ask any questions, so that throughout and then also at the end, just for that reassurance. Okay, I'll hand over to Beth.
So,
our first
thanks,
activity.
Sarah. So the first activity I'd like you to do is your KWL activity, and I emailed this out yesterday, so if anyone hasn't received it, if you post your email in the chat and I can send it out again. So in your KW activity, we are going to share what you already know, what you want to learn, and then afterwards you will review what did you learn. So use the participant handbook, and we'll just give you a few minutes to have a think about what you already know, what you want to learn, and then if you could post in the chat 3 things that you want to know. But like I said, if anyone hasn't received the workbook, if you send me your email, I can send that over. And if you have, great, that means the email was sent out. And if you could share 3 things that you would like to know in the chat box.
Like this activity, and it might be that what you know is how long the qualification takes. It might be that you can name some of the content areas. It might be that you know the assessment methods, or that might be something that you want to find out. You might know the title of them, but you want to find out more information. And when it comes to what you want to learn at NCFE, we and comes into the questions as well. We have a phrase that we use all the time, and it's that no question is a silly question. We don't know what we don't know. So what do we want to learn? Be as open and honest there with us so that we can help and support you. Absolutely no judgment will be passed on what you want to know. Perfect. What is the assessment method? How long will it take? And how to teach effectively? Oh, we've got that covered.
Yeah, we'll cover that,
got that
throughout.
For you this sunny afternoon. Absolutely.
Definitely.
We'll answer all of those for you, Stefan. Don't worry. When is the
we can cover that as well.
Yeah, we'll have a look at sort of the overview of the qualification in a couple of slides. We've got a visual which will be quite easy to show that understanding of how the content needs to be taught, and where that would fit in, and we can advise on where you might be able to fit in, or where we'd advise to fit in a mock of both the NEA and when you might fit in a mock exam to sort of track student progress. As I say, any of those, what I want to learn as we're going, feel free, and between Beth and I will be monitoring that chat box, won't we, Beth?
Yep.
So hopefully to begin to answer some of that, what you want to learn, I'll start with a brief overview of the structure of the qualification and of the technical award. Not now, just letting me click through.
So the guided learning hours are 142 hours, and that includes the 120 hours for delivery and then 2 hours for the NEA, and the NEA is 1 hour 30 minutes for the EA, sorry. So the NEA is 2 hours and the EA is 1 hour 30 minutes. The TQT is 156 hours, and this includes homework you might set and/or independent learning. The NEA is 60% weighting and the EA is 40% weighting. The content assessed is in the EA and the NEA, and it will be sampled from across the full breadth of the qualification. And the overall grades are a level 1 pass up to a distinction, and for a level 2, they're up to a distinction star. So the exam assessment assessment, that's 1 hour, 30 minutes. That's a mixture of multiple choice questions, long answer, short answer question. And then the NEA, that is a synoptic project. And the NEA is assessed by yourselves and internally verified by yourself. And the EA is assessed by NCFE.
Perfect. So can
Are we
you
rolling?
Can you see the visual there of the qualification structure? Thank you. And I've managed to find my Teams to navigate through the slides now. So apologies for that. So yeah, everything that Beth just shared with you there is in that table for reference, and will also be in the handouts that of the slides which have been sent to you from today's session. So now I've worked out my IT. Can't you tell that she does sports? Keep her outside and keep her away from computers. I want to just explore how you would plan your curriculum for this qualification and what your learner journey is going to look like and why. So we'll have a look at it in a little bit of detail, look at the qualification spec, and then we can stop at any point, share ideas, and this can be as interactive and sort of led by you as you would like this session. So when considering curriculum planning, this quote for me really resonates with me, and I've used it often when I was planning my own curriculum, post-it notes out, everything all over a big desk in school, thinking about how I was going to approach particular areas and which order I was going to teach it in. And so we've got that Dylan Williams has noted that the benefits of practice testing and distributed learning are two of the most strongly supported learning strategies in all of psychology. So when you're thinking about your qualification spec and the what you need to teach aspects of that, so your content areas and that indicative content, that distributed learning was looking here that it does not need to be, and nor was it ever the intent for them to be delivered linear in the order that they come in the qualification spec. And that you would have a look and use your subject area expertise, experience. And I know you're saying that new to teaching, but that experience that you've had from your teaching qualifications and that you've had a look at and what you bring to the point you're in your current role is sort of how you can make sure that that qualification specification is personalised for your students and that it's delivered in the best and most meaningful way. And so that spaced practice is spacing out retrieval and recall of knowledge over a period of time rather than cramming it like cram practice that you're regularly revisiting prior learned material. So an important part of your effectively planned curriculum is that you're providing the opportunity for your pupils to forget and relearn what you're teaching them, so that that supports the transfer of knowledge to their long-term memory. So if you're thinking about those content areas, and we'll look at sort of where the exams come in and where the NEA comes, if you taught content area 1 in September and October, are your students going to remember that when you come to the NEA, or are you teaching it at one level and then revisiting it at a deeper level and asking them to recall that initial knowledge and then build on that? So always starting with where your students are and what they bring, and then building from there retrieval tasks, identifying those gaps in knowledge and making sure that throughout the 2 years of delivery, students are repeatedly referring back and building and increasing that depth of knowledge. And Beth's going to have a look now at how we can take that quote and think about that distributed learning as you plan your curriculum a bit more.
So considering the content areas, let's explore a moment the blocked approach versus the interleaving approach that you can see on the slide, and how spaced learning and retrieval can support delivery of the new vCert model. So block study, which involves studying a topic before moving on to another, may have suited the previous VCERT model, which featured an end-of-unit assessment. However, the information isn't being transferred to long-term memory, which needs to be the primary focus. So with the new VCERT, such that strategy for students no longer to do that end unit assessment, the ability to retain and recall large pieces of information has become even more important, and the science of learning evidence that interleaving is the most effective strategy. The example on the screen explores how content can be mapped using a blocked approach compared to an interleaved approach. So what we'd like you to do in the chat, can you let us know which approach you were planning, if you've thought about that yet, and were you planning on to teach content area by one, or have you explored the content and made natural links across the content areas? So if you could just post in the chat, that would be great, what you sort of thought about doing. So interleaving is referring to mixing up subjects, topics. So mixing up the content areas instead of blocking them together. And this helps the students make the connections and leads to the benefits for those transfer of learner skills. So we've got, I would have done it in blocks, but after seeing interleaving, I feel that it's more effective now. I've seen and heard how it works in theory. Mostly I follow through a linear fashion to help me get all content covered and to get my head around it. Yeah, that's true when you're doing a new delivery of a qualification. So in the context of your curriculum planning and design, mapping the core context knowledge and understanding effectively is allowing that overlap and that naturally holistic links alongside careful consideration space practice and that well-designed retrieval tasks and testing. And that's an excellent formative assessment opportunity for you to use as a teacher, also while preparing your learners for that summative assessment for the core exams that come in year 2. And we'll look further at formative assessment methods to support practice testing and retrieval later in the session. But now we're going to have a look at the whole learner journey and how it's woven into curriculum planning. So we'll be aware of the qualification content, which is in your curriculum. You'll be planning the order of delivery. But it's important to remember the whole journey, including knowledge, skills, behaviours that your learners need to be successful in their choice of industry area. So we've added some other areas which might be important to include here too, but this list is not exhaustive and you need to be individualised for each learner. So in the chat, can you add any other themes of things for your learner journey? So it could be things like the English and maths skills, work industry skills.
You might be having a look at those ideas sort of on the screen. You've got your knowledge, which will be your content that's in your qualification, and we look there at sort of see how you might sequence it, interleaving it. But that idea of themes, if we're talking at sort of about sports studies, is the key milestones throughout the year that you might want to be visiting with your students, which would be important. Are there also themes linked around sport that you might want to get in? So for example, might you be looking at like specific sports stars in some particular areas and linking your curriculum to that? Might you be linking it to actual sporting events throughout the year? I'm an absolute lover of Formula One. If I could ever tie any of my sort of curriculum to that, I would tie it in, but you can bring different themes throughout there. And starting to sort of just thinking about that wider curriculum as well, and how you might sort of plan for that to make that content of the qualification come to life for your students, and that they see it not just as a curriculum, but that bigger picture.
So we've got in the chat, we've just a year 10 assessment, which we sat examine. The next milestone for me is the 11-year mock exam in October.
Yeah, so thinking about how you're sort of getting all of those extra skills in there as well that your students are going to need. Are they thinking about the industry that they're going into as well, and that they're not just learning that knowledge, but that we're developing professionals for the sector that they're going into, thinking about those skills and behaviours? Are they mapped as well within your learner journey and your curriculum, so that your students can, and it's building that the ownership really of the students leading those skills and behaviours as well as the acquisition of knowledge? So are they building throughout? Can they reflect and see where they were at the start of their course and how the behaviours have progressed throughout, and how that makes them more effective in their studies as well?
And we've got in the chat, my big plan now, when to allocate a half term for the NEA. Yeah, that's the thing as well, fitting when we go over the plan, it's remembering where the half terms are, where the holidays are, that, the Easter always moves. Yeah, planning around that as well.
Perfect. Okay, so if we think about the qualification in particular, you can see the content areas there that you've that are on the screen and that you will be covering. And we can think back to just that last slide, and maybe when you can see them on the screen now, and hopefully you've got the link to your qualification spec as well, and that you've got those. And that will provide the indicative content and some teaching guidance and ideas. I think that's quite good how it comes up with activities within there that you could teach to demonstrate and further expand on the sort of content areas. Beth's going to put the link in the chat for you, so that if you didn't have access to it, you've got that to refer to today as well. But just having a look on there and thinking about sort of recent stuff that would be relevant, those themes almost, where you can bring the qualification to life. That sponsorship and media. I know that there's just been a film out recently which sort of looked at Michael Jordan and that sponsorship and the impact that that had. Are those being brought into sort of the teaching and learning as well, to really bring it to life, and that they can see, and sort of those debates over how athletes get sponsorships and stuff like that in sport.
So here's a visual structure of the new VCert, and we did cover this more in depth in part 1 of the Prep to Teach, which is available for your YouTube playlist, but I'll just talk over it a little bit because I know that was one of the questions. So you can see from the structure that year 1 is delivering the content, and then in year 2, the NEA brief, it is released in September, but it doesn't have to be delivered then. It may be that after the summer, I know when my learners used to come back after the summer, they used to, forgotten lots of things. So it might be that in the September, you want to revisit content areas before you deliver the NEA. You might want to do a practice of an NEA before they do the real thing, so they've got the used to the different steps of the NEA. And then as long as your NEA is assessed, internally verified and uploaded to the portal by April the 30th. And as you said before, remembering to fit the holidays in around that as well. So a recommended time would possibly be January to deliver your NEA, but it does depend on your school, your learners, what else your school needs to cover alongside. And then May, June is when you have the exam assessment. So I've just got a question. Do you think we should have all content areas covered in year 1? The bulk, but you could still cover some in that September to January window, or revisit ones that you maybe think learners need to make sure they've got that knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's really sort of important, that revisiting, isn't it? So have the experience, the content at one level, but that you're going deeper to prepare them to be able to make those links and pull it all together for their NEA, and then also starting to get ready for their exams as well. Thanks, Beth. So when we've sort of explored that idea of interleaving content areas, and it might be that you're not necessarily breaking full content areas down into individual indicative content statement sort of questions or statements, for example, but that you're thinking about that linking forward and back and making the links, even if you're teaching content areas. It might be that as you have a look at it, participation in sport is content area 1, but you might think that that is better taught later on in the curriculum. Uses of technology in sport, you might want to teach that earlier on so that they can start sort of exploring that as they are making the links to lots of other areas as well. Or the idea that the sort of that review and reflection, which is the content area 10, what would the students learn from that particular content area, which would enhance and support the rest of the learning throughout the qualification. So when you're breaking it all down and looking at the different elements, what we really want is that, or that will be required of your students, is that they can combine elements of their learning and show an accumulated knowledge and understanding across the breadth of the qualification content. The synoptic assessment, so the NEA, enables your pupils to evidence their capability and integrate and apply knowledge, understanding and skills that are gained. So that's where they'll be able to demonstrate that. So making that explicit to your students through teaching and that they're not just relying on one area is really important. And so from planning aspects, it's essential that throughout that delivery that the interdependencies and the links build across the content. So looking at, are there common themes? How is year 10 going to link to year 11? What skills are they embedding? What knowledge are they embedding as they're going through? And they're just questions to be thinking of as you're coming up with that sort of plan ready for teaching in September. And if you as teachers can take that synoptic approach across the qualification, then that will support your students to be able to apply theories and concepts that they're learning in context to skills-based situations, which will obviously are sector specific. So through combining content and those holistic connections, your pupils will then be supported to demonstrate and evidence their full knowledge and understanding of the subject area of sport. So we'll have a look now at the tasks of the NEA. And if you think you've got that content areas 1 to 10, then when we have a look at the tasks on the next slide, you'll be able to look at which sort of areas would support. So you can see there on the screen the summary of the NEA tasks for sports studies and the marks that are available for each section. So each section getting sort of equal marks throughout there for the students. So each task being of equal weighting and importance to the students, and them knowing that to keep that stamina going right till task 5 when they'll review and evaluate sort of what they've done. So the key point to note here is that when you are considering your learner journey and sequencing the curriculum, the content areas, linking them continually to the NEA tasks so that your students are aware of what they're learning and how that's going to be demonstrated in an assessment will really help them. And with that, you can use sort of the sample materials that are there to support them and to practice with those. And it's worth considering how your learner journey will link with the external assessment as well. So if we're thinking about the exams, how is that being interwoven into your curriculum as you're teaching to prepare your students? And so time for some interaction. Will keep us all awake this afternoon. And thinking about the content, there's some questions there on the board. And thinking about sort of your knowledge roadmap or your learner journey for your students. We can do this in the chat. This is also linked on the Jamboard that for you to be able to sort of record your ideas on as well. But as there's just a few of us, we can share in here. Just having a read through of sort of the questions that are on the board to think about initially, but then thinking, you can see the one on the screen there, and we've sort of got the indicative content broken down a little bit more. Are there any common themes that you can spot already? Are there any natural links forward and links back that you can see to sort of start to fit in your formative assessment? Can you see where you can embed the knowledge and then build on that further, and how you could embed the skills that would be required for the sector as well? If we can share those ideas in the chat, or if you want to write them in your sort of your workbook or the Jamboard. But I think it's always good to share ideas. It might be that someone's seen a link that somebody else hasn't, and that can open a new way of thinking about the curriculum. I think, like, if I look at content area 5, the planning and delivery and review of a sports competition, and then start to so when a new synoptic topic each year.
That's just me. That's me answering the question. So the question's asking, will it be will the NEA be similar each year? Following that, the previous slide of all the tasks, it'll just be a new. It'll follow the task, but it'll have a new brief. Yeah, looking at that sort of the roles and responsibilities for planning and delivery, does that link with sponsorship? Does that link with ethics as well? If you're starting to think about that bigger picture for your students, to make those links, that then they can draw all of that information in. And it might be that at the moment it's familiarising yourself with those content areas in a little bit more detail first to fit for where you feel comfortable with, and once you've delivered it the first year and you come to the next content area, then you're like, actually I can see how this would link, and next time I'll do it that way. From a starting perspective, it's just thinking about how that curriculum could be best mapped for your students. Has everyone managed to open the Jamboard? It's on page 2. And has everyone used a Jamboard before?
And it might at this point be where you're just looking at whole content areas and looking at the order that you would teach those in. Does sponsorship and a barrier link as well, that depending on what level of sport and where they're at, does sponsorship make a difference between that ability to participate? Media and women in sport, that's a really good one. I think that's sort of one that they'll all be aware of as well, isn't it, off the back of the World Cup, looking at how that works and where they can watch it and who will have that on which channels and how much they get paid. All of those ideas can come into really sort of enhance the debate that you're having with your students around the content areas, and I think they get really passionate about it once they find out, and we'll all have different views on it. Yeah, so that, and how is technology supporting sort of recovery and identifying injuries? I think like sessions like today are really good for just taking that time to actually have a look at where those links are. Because I know that once you're in the classroom, you don't get the time to sort of unpick it, and days fly by. But this can just give you that opportunity to just pause for a moment and have a look at that content in a little bit more of a granular detail, and find out how you can enhance and make the links. Perfect. So I'll leave that activity for something that you might want to continue doing in the background. It might be something that you take away from today's session. On the screen, you'll be able to see a plan, do, review, sort of a reflection task. And that idea being that if you think of that as activity 1, what have you already done? So it might be that you'd already planned your content. It might be that you'd already started to explore the qualification. And then sort of from today's, any thoughts that have come up from what we've discussed today, what will you do following today's session? And that might be that you just put some planning time aside. It might be that you book in an appointment with sort of curriculum leader or area, if that isn't yourself. It might be that you network with another school. It might be that you're going to book in and contact NCFE for further sort of information and guidance around that. What will you do next week? And by September, what will you want to have achieved if you're thinking about that curriculum mapping? So feel free to do that as we're going. We'll move on to activity 2, and then you can sort of add to it as we're going. So activity 2, using the Jamboard. We want to think about active teaching. So how can you bring that qualification specification to life so that students aren't just sat behind the desk listening to it being taught? And very much so with it being around sport and being active. So again, there's some questions there on the board to generate ideas. Some ideas that have already been shared about getting in guest speakers. And it's that idea that we want students to be active, to take those ideas into their learning, that we want them to sort of be progressing those skills as well. And then on the Jamboard, on page 3, there will be, I'll just show you quickly. She says she clicked the wrong button. There's this table that you can see there. And you can use the sticky notes again, and we've broken it down into content areas. And we want you to think about how could you turn that content area into active learning for your students. So as I said, there was already mention of external visits or guest speakers. Sport development officers may be able to discuss areas of development in the local community, for example. And when you're looking at that participation, they could be looking at funding and skills and how sort of different areas are being supported there. For example, flashcards. But if we can start to add some ideas onto that Jamboard on page 3, that would be great, of how you could turn that into active learning. Thinking about that sports leadership and sports coaching. Potentially, how could we turn that into sort of active teaching for them? Might they be coaching younger pupils in school? And again, using the content areas that we shared with you before, might just give you some ideas of that indicative content of how you could add some more ideas on. Do you have any technology in school, for example, that you could start to use with the students that they would be able to make that a practical session? And again, this might be an activity that you just want to take away and do with your curriculum team. Perfect. So I'll leave that up and you can continue to add post-it notes to that one. And then I'll also share activity 3, and then we'll go back to that sort of plan, do, review, just to give you that time for reflection and to sort of set any targets from today. Is sharing any ideas and resources, which is what we always try to facilitate in our sessions. So I always used to love stumbling across or someone sharing a new resource that I'd not seen before that could change learning. So leading on from that activity 2, I thought it would be useful to share any best practice resources or ideas which could enhance effective practice. So is there anything in particular that you've already used within that subject area, anything that came from your teaching sort of experience as you were qualifying that you thought or that you were exposed to, and how do you use them? Is there an opportunity outside of the session to share resources with each other? There's a few examples that are there on the screen or on the Jamboard if you click to the next slide. But for example, researching high profile performers who've been found guilty of taking performance enhancing drugs. That might be an activity that's really sparked that debate and that really engaged your students that somebody else might have not have thought of. And another example is to show a recorded sporting event and show brand logo positioning and camera positioning to create awareness of sponsor involvement. Sharing any other ideas, or again, feeling free to type those in the chat, or if it's easier to explain it verbally, manage your microphone and share that with us if you've found anything of use. It could be a website, it could be some learning videos, anything that you've come across that you find useful. Not sure if any of you have like local sports partnerships that you've sort of offer support in those areas that can help. It's just and it might be that this is one of your areas and you think that's what I'm going to spend some time doing, is exploring resources and looking at how you can sort of share that to support your development of your curriculum. I'll just hand over to Beth and she'll just go through the last few slides on this point and then we'll move on.
So again, looking over the activities that we've sort of discussed that you can do, remember to revisit your plan, do review. So what you already have, what you want to do today after this session and by next week, and then by September as well. So make sure you keep completing that plan in your workbook just to support you, and make sure you're ticking off those things that you want to do for the qualification. So there are free classroom packs, including schemes of work in a digital and editable format, containing ready-to-go teaching and learning materials with everything you need to deliver the vCert effectively. And there will be comprehensive workbooks to complement your schema work, which will include independent study tasks, classroom-based activities to recap and assess learning. And these can be used as homework or flipped learning opportunities, whatever you decide. And the workbooks will contain learner roundups, which will have short formative assessment for your pupils to assess their knowledge using similar questions that will be question styles that will be in the EA, such as the multiple choice, the short answer questions and the long answer questions. So these are available on our qual page, which we'll cover later on in the resources. So we're now going to take a closer look at assessment, in particular formative assessment. So let's recap back to the quote we shared previously, but explore practice testing and how this links to formative assessment and preparing your pupils for the EA and the NEA. In the context of your curriculum planning and design, mapping those core content knowledge and understanding effectively, allowing that overlap and naturally holistic links alongside carefully consideration, space practiced and well-designed retrieval tasks and testing. This is an excellent formative assessment opportunity for you as a practitioner, whilst also preparing your pupils for the summative assessment and the core exams that come in the year 2. And research suggests that practice testing at regular intervals can help prepare students for exams to reduce anxiety, as well as use retrieving knowledge on a regular basis. So it's important that we have a variety of methods for formative assessment, which are contextualised and take place at regular basis. It's also important to have both feedback, which is focused on past performance, and feed forward, which is focused on their development in the future. So formative assessment helps the development of wider skills, knowledge, competencies and confidence, and it enhances their employability skills, which links to the learner journey explored earlier, as well as gaining knowledge and development. So students are aware of the skills and how to develop those. To support you in part of your preparation for your delivery in that year 10, we're going to spend the next few parts looking at different ways that you can use formative assessment in the year 1 of the VCERT qualification.
Sorry,
I've now not jumped on either. So on the screen now, you can see a range of formative assessment methods. So in the chat, have you used any of these before, or have you heard of any of these before? So if you want to post in the chat if you've heard of them or used them before, or if there's any on there that we haven't covered that you may have used in your teaching. So there's the apps that you can use, there's topic tests, quizzes. So we've got Kahoots. You could do debates, self-assessment, peer assessment.
Kahoot specific. So I can see in the chat Kahoot specifically, and I think that's good because sometimes they're already pre-populated, aren't they? Those quizzes, and you can support by sharing those, particularly if you can search for them. I also used to like a good true or false.
So is there any that you think you might want to try, new ones? And do you feel like you're getting a wide range of activities? Are you covering lots of different styles of formative assessment?
We like Slido, we use a lot, don't we, when we're doing our interactions on any of our CPD that we're delivering. And if you haven't used Slido before, it's super simple to set up, and I'd recommend having an explore of that. But for your students, you can gauge everything from you can do word clouds on it, you can do it like the question that we asked at the beginning, the poll, but you can set all those different activities up within one Slido for you to be able to use, and then it will give you all that information afterwards on your students and who answered what. But particularly the word cloud can be really good to remove that sort of idea of a wrong or right, that they're just sharing ideas. That's one that we found very useful in sort of our training and learning that we've delivered. Thanks, Beth. So before we move into our sort of next activity that we're going to share with you and sort of generate ideas, I want to just move on to feedback. And I wonder if it's a simple thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat. If I said yellow box marking for feedback, is that something that anyone is aware of what I mean? Are you using yellow box feedback in your marking? And then we can just see how we go into the next bit for that explanation of how you can use it to support sort of focused feedback and sort of progress from that formative assessment and close gaps in learning. Okay, so we've got a not sure and a thumbs down. So hopefully by the end of the next slide, I'll have explained myself, and it might be something that you find that you can use in your teaching and learning to support your students. So yellow box marking, again, is sort of an approach used by Dylan Williams. And if we look at, you can see that image there on the screen, he looks at the quality of marking and the impact that it has on And he suggests a sort of 4-quadrant approach to marking of student work, so that 25% of it marked in detail of what students do, 25% is self-assessed, with the teacher monitoring the quality of that self-assessment, 25% should be peer assessed, so working within a peer group or peer study groups, and that 25% of what students are producing can sort of be skimmed over because you've got that 75% of quality marking elsewhere. So yellow box marking focuses, and that's looking at that 25% of work marked in details of what students do. And within that, looking at it, it's a powerful method that can address sort of when we're looking at that knowledge, skills and behaviours earlier on, thinking as well that we're not always talking about written work, it'll be practical sometimes, or active learning as you're giving that feedback, but that live marking that you're doing of that 25% puts a greater emphasis on that verbal dialogue that you're having, and is very scripted and targeted to help pupils improve their work. So it's got a very clear focus about what that is, what we're targeting in that feedback. So by putting the yellow box around that area of work, it's targeted approach to which ensures that teachers and pupils are focusing on specific areas of work rather than the entire piece. So out of the piece of work that the students are doing, what is the most important part that we're having a look at in relation to where students are and where we want students to get to? So if you're thinking about your NEA tasks and you're starting to embed those into your teaching, which are areas of strength and which do you need to focus on to make sure that students are performing well in that area? And that can just encourage yourselves as teachers to make sure that the feedback is diagnostic and supports improvement, but also that the work is clearly marked, focusing on key marking points for pupils. And there we've talked about sort of that yellow box marking that you've put it round. Which area of the work are you expecting your students to improve? But that verbal feedback over written feedback for your students has been proven in a study to be favoured and have more of an impact. So pupils who received verbal feedback perceived the feedback to be better in terms of quality, how they could then use that, and the quantity and timing. So rather than writing lots on students' work verbally for that feedback, yellow box around the area that you need to improve, and verbal communication with students about how they need to do that. Now, it might be that you do that as a whole class, that you identify parts of students' work with that yellow box, and then collectively as the class you give that feedback about what they need to do to improve, and then they go and do that within that sort of targeted area. But that can also come, as you can see on the diagram there, from peer or self-feedback, and that makes that feedback instant and sort of immediately actionable. So within the lesson, are we stopping and pausing and giving them chance to reflect back on what they've done so far, but also look at what their peer has done next to them, linking it to what was the bigger picture of the lesson, what were they focusing on, and what sort of areas are they working towards at the moment. And in that regard, they're getting formative feedback instantly. You'll be able to see any common errors across content areas and misconceptions, and then as a teacher be able to readdress those. And the final idea, thinking about that marking, is the idea of where or how are they repeating that content. So thinking back to that interleaving, and what are the intervals between teaching and feedback and activities. So if you've given them feedback, when are you going to next plan an activity or an opportunity for them to demonstrate that they've applied that feedback and that they've improved in that area? And with that in mind, we're going to have a look now at some activities that you could use with your students, formative assessment activities, which will focus on key aspects of the qualification, but that also then might come back into that feedback and marking. So this is activity 4, and we're going to put some of all that theory of that sort of space practice, thinking about marking and everything that we've covered so far. And we'll look at some tasks that we can see. Now, these are on your Jamboard, and so there is that opportunity to further take these away and put them into practice. But between Beth and I will talk through how you can use them if you haven't seen these activities before, and how you can adapt them and use them with your students. So I'll begin with Walkabout Bingo. If that is small on your screen, as I say, it is on the Jamboard as well, so you might be able to see that in a little bit with a little bit of clarity, almost, of the text if it is a little bit small. So this Walkabout Bingo, you can see on the screen, contains questions from content area 2 for ethics in sport. You can see those sorts of questions there that you would expect or want your students to be able to retrieve and have that knowledge of ready for their NEA and also for their exam. So the idea with this, you might be able to identify that student in your class who has all the answers, and then that student in your class who would struggle or take a little bit longer to access that prior learning and that knowledge to answer the questions. But this task works that pupils can only ask their peers one question each, and then they have to record the answer that they gave and their name and then move on. Just like every bingo, first person to have all their answers shouts bingo. But this task really encourages your pupils to talk to one another, going beyond the typical think, pair and share, as they have to engage with different members of the class. They also know they're all going to have to answer a question for everybody in their class, so there's no hiding. It's very simple to create and also very adaptable. And with this, whilst your students are going round, you can sort of stand back and observe and look for any misconceptions or as they're going round, and listen to those and sort of challenge for that deeper answer if they're answering superficially. So this is one that's there for you, and then you can think potentially how you might adapt this for other content areas. But I'll hand over to Beth and she'll share our next activity with you.
Thanks, Sarah. So this activity is expand and elaborate. So you, as a teacher, you provide statements from any of the content areas, and you ask your learners to come up with some statements. So the one here, this is an example from content area 3 and 4. And having a but, because, and so allows your pupils to develop the statement in more detail, as well as develop the detail and the complexity of it. So again, this is on your Jamboard for you to take away. So in the chat, can you add an example of a but to the television can expose sport to a wider audience? So if you were asking your learners, television can expose sport to a wider audience, what would the but be? So Sarah said, but some sports require paid for subscriptions, yes.
Thinking of Sky Sports in my household, if the subscription runs out or if I don't want to pay for it for particular football teams.
But it may deter people from attending live games. Yeah, I mean, television's now huge. You know, some people don't like the crowd. It's cheaper to have you, be at home and watch it on the screen.
I think this is activities really good for showing that depth of understanding of different pupils within the class, depending on how do they all do but answers when they're doing the expansion, but also it can just come into that sort of extension of writing that you're expecting of your students as well, that they're not just giving simple statements but they're also expanding those as well. I like this activity. think sometimes it might sort of provide that opportunity for for teachers, for us not to be surprised by what some of the students come up with as their answers. That it shows those connections that they're making and that understanding. Thanks, Beth. I'm going to share the thinking and linking grid because I'm mindful of time, and then we will get through where you can ask any questions about these. So the thinking and linking grid is really good for developing the sort of word bank and content specific vocabulary, that tier 3 vocabulary that you would want your students to use in their explanations, and so that they've got that bank, one from a spelling perspective, but also that they're being exposed to it all the time. So the content area or section of indicative content chosen here is content area 8. And within the table are all the keywords and terminology associated with it within the grid. And this could be differentiated for your students, that some might have 1 to 6 and others might have 4 to 4 across. So they are all adaptable activities. So your pupils would roll a dice, and the number that is rolled identifies the keyword. So if they roll 2 dice and they rolled a 4 and a 1, you've got verbal communication. And then if they rolled a 3 and a 2, how does verbal communication and video analysis link? And then you can see in the links made, they would write the word from one box, the word from another, and what link they can make between the two of them. And that just helps them make those links we've talked about across the whole content area as you're teaching it, rather than looking at each lesson in isolation. And that your pupils are just becoming more exposed to them. It can be used as a starter activity, a homework activity, revision, but it just makes those links throughout the different stages. On the Jamboard, there will be alternative sort of content areas, and that might be one of your think, do, planning tasks that you think, yeah, I'm going to generate the vocabulary from each of the content areas into this ready. You might want them ready by September. But also consider having some examples of the links that can be made, particularly ones that you think will be pertinent to your students. So you've got those examples to share with them as well. And the last task before I ask questions and then hand over to Beth about resources and support is misconception retrieval. So this is the psychology for sports content area that we've used here. And there'll be some misconceptions. Now, if you're new to the qualification, it might be that you're not aware of common misconceptions yet that the students might bring to this content area. So as you're teaching it, you could start to keep sort of a misconception wall and share those ideas, and that you're celebrating almost those misconceptions and not seen as errors, but that you use that as an opportunity to correct or come up with the better answer. And you can see there that we've got some of the misconceptions that we've shared, that have been shared with us from different providers, or that from teaching ourselves. And then you would use it as an activity with your students to better those examples. And again, you could do this in groups, you could do it in pairs. This is the misconception, which group can come up with the best answer, or that you build on it so that you're doing that as a whole class and that you start to come up with the sort of the best response to that. So there's some activities that you've got to take away and that can really sort of support that formative assessment, identifying gaps and preparing for the assessment. Has anyone got any questions before I hand over to Beth, who will talk through our resources and then finish off today's session before we move on? Just check the chat. Nothing at the minute. I can't see any typing. So I'll hand over to yourself, Beth, to do the resources.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, it's just sticking.
So I'm going to talk through about what resources and support are available to you delivering the VCERT qualification from NCFE. So we have the website, We have the NCFE website, and within this we have a VCERT page, and this is where you'll find information on the VCERTs and the 14 to 16 schools brochure that contains information about the Key Stage 4 vocational education and how to learn more about VCERT qualifications. You'll also find the link for each of the subject-specific pages and which contains information such as the specification, sample assessment materials and teaching materials. We also have our parent supporter and pupil VCERT information hub. This is great as well, the parent guide for when you have options evening or in school in year 9. And then on both pages, you can use a get in touch function where you can request more information on subjects. And there's also an opportunity to tick the marketing communication box to receive updates on our qualification events and news that's relevant to you via email or through phone or social media channel. We also have our subject-specific pages. So we've integrated the Qual Hub page into the NCFE page now. So the NCFE page is where you'll find to go to search all our qualifications and access the specification, the assessment, the teaching materials, regulations, course file document, and so much more. There's lots in there to support you with your qualification. And you can use our search qualification function by adding your subject area or qualification code, and you select VCERTs in the featured box. But always make sure you've got the correct page by checking the QUAN number of the qualification. And that page was for sports studies. And this is where you'll find all the downloadable sport materials, such as the qual spec, and along with lots of other important information. And you can also refer to the portal user guide within the website as well for further support. We then have our on-demand webinars, and this is where the VCERT playlist on our YouTube channel is, and this is where you'll find numerous webinars, CPD session, training events, which you can access on demand. And then you have us at the provider development team. So what happens once you've registered your learners and you are approved to deliver the qualification, you'll be contacted by ourselves, the provider development team, as part of your onboarding process. And this service is really tailored to you and your individual needs of your centre and to make sure your requirements are met. And we're a team that support the staff that's teaching the VCERT qualification, and we help you to prepare to teach the qualification and make sure everything's clear for the requirements of the delivery and assessment. There is also, as I said before, the regular CPD sessions that we deliver from the provider development team. And these are throughout the year, and these will be around key assessment times to make sure on track and feeling confident. And as you can see, we offer a range from the list on the slide. And then other support that is available. This includes our wonderful customer support team, and you can contact them via email or phone call, and they're really good at supporting you with registration queries, bookings, the portal. And then there's also the VCERT email that's a direct to any VCERT inquiries.
Thanks, Beth. So yeah, if any of that is something that you want support with, then get in touch with us and we can explore that in more detail. And that just really brings us to the last section, which is next steps and any questions or further information and guidance you would like from ourselves. So on the screen, you can see that we've got those reflection activities, and we'll go back to that, what I have learned. I wonder if in the chat anyone can share what have we learned from the start. If you think about what you wanted to know, have those questions been answered? If we can just share one thing each that we've learned from today's session, and then feedback about the session is always welcomed from us, and there's a QR code on the screen there. So we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to give the feedback about what you found useful from the session, everything from the length of it to the resources that are shared. So that would really be appreciated. And then we will just open the floor really. If you've got any questions, maybe you had your what I want to know before, and now you've got some further what I would still like to know, then that would be great, and Beth and I can just help you. If you haven't got any further questions, I can see them coming there.
Oh, you said thank you for going through this. I feel more confident now. Well, that could lead us on to launching the poll to see if the confidence levels have gone up.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so if we can just take, that'll come up on your screen. And if you think about where we started with those confidence scores, where would you put yourself now about the delivery and assessment for the vCert qualification? Perfect. So yeah, I can see there that gap is much shorter this time from where we were to start off with, that those confidence scores were either roughly the same, but hopefully you've had your questions answered that you had at the beginning. So that what do I know and what else do I want to learn? But yeah, thank you. That just leaves us to say, if you have got any questions, then please use this opportunity to ask myself or Beth, and we can answer those for you. But if not, we will just thank you for attending as well. That's what we're here to do, help and support you to deliver the qualification so that the learners get the best experience and the best outcomes.
You'll see on the final slide as well, you have our email, our provider development direct email, and Kelly Johnson, who is our health and fitness and sports studies lead for our vCert